Hello, everyone. Welcome to another conversation with Tribe of Humankind. We're here to address the spiritual evolution of our species, how we are approaching it from our own individual self, and how we're perceiving it in our families, our communities, our friends, and how we like to vision it for the future, what our highest vision for ourselves and humanity is in the future, and how we understand the best way to arrive there and how we can start to implement the structures, the means to arrive there. Today's Saturday, June 17th. This is our 11th episode. And before we get into all the topics that we feel are most important to speak to, I like to land our conversations in the realness of our heart space, the realness of our personal lives, of like what's most meaningful, most alive, most real for us this week or last week. And with that, I'll open up the floor to my two brothers here, Mano and Lex, and who have been a part of this conversation from the beginning. And we'll do a check-in, see how they're doing today, and let them speak to share, a little bit of what they can feel is most alive inside their soul. And we'll start the conversation from that place and let it develop out from there. So thank you for being here today, both of you. And whoever is ready first to speak, go ahead and present yourself.
I'll go.
Yeah.
So you did a little edit recently, and I saw myself talking, and everyone can probably relate to this. When you see yourself or hear yourself talking, you're horrified for a start, but I stuck with it. And in the edit, I said that I'm trying to not love anyone or anything in particular, and yet somehow still be love. And that video, I saw it, and it reminded me to try that. So I did. I walked around trying to sort of, for no apparent reason, sense that I was in love with, I don't know, like just like a like it was a song or something I was tuning into, and it was interesting. I felt different. I felt more at peace, but also I sat on a bench. There's a bench I go and sit on, and this particular day I sat there, and as soon as I sat down, somebody sat next to me, and I had a really pleasant conversation. And they left, and somebody else sat down and had another pleasant conversation. And I was there for 4 hours, and in the whole 4 hours, somebody replaced each person and started a conversation with me. And I just thought that was interesting. So, you know,
Totally. I relate to that. There's strange energy currents that humans move in. Like we have our retail store here in Stowe in the World, and certain days, like certain energy types will come into our store and they'll be followed by the same energy types for the next hour or two. And we haven't seen that happen for weeks or months, but in that same hour or two, it gets like there's energy streams that humans fall into, and similar things happen or expressed inside of those little energy streams, it seems. That's a fun experiment. You kind of challenge yourself with what you spoke out in your last video or something like that. And
yeah, it was really good timing to see that, because I'd forgotten, because I got really into thinking, which I have to do. But it's, what do you check in with first? Do you check in with the thinking and then think about love stuff, or do you check in with sensing into that feeling and then start thinking? And it was different.
mm-hmm. And how was your mood after the 4 hours of being on the bench?
I wasn't exhausted. People usually are quite exhausting, aren't they? And
Mm.
what was really strange was that it seemed like, I'm going to use this cliche heart space, but from as I was sat in heart space, it felt like that caused a heart space that other people then arrived into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like maybe they were drawn to that energy, and once they could sit down in that space, it was like a safe space for them to open up and explore their own heart space inside of that, and they could enjoy the pleasantness of that, and you were already there, and then it just was like an amplified zone, and then easy for other people to come find and repeat that scenario. I'm like,
It was almost as if I was speaking an old language that people have almost forgotten, you know?
it's a good way of putting it. I feel like we're guided by our psychic sense way more than we are consciously aware of. Like psychically, they're guided to that zone because they felt it was attractive on some level, or it felt safe or good. And they're like, oh, that's a good place to sit down. And then so sat there, they're in a good space and their heart's feeling open. And they're like, oh, I want to talk about this thing. And it feels really good. And share this sweet moment with my friend or my lover. And then it's like, yeah, it's just like waves of that magic happening. And people enter into it. Like, very cool. Very cool.
Definitely, I can totally relate to that. And it's a pretty sweet spot to be in. Just, it's just a good reminder even for me to, yeah, just to get into those spaces within ourselves. And I even noticed that whenever I'm having a conversation or something, even just by simply becoming aware of how I'm feeling, that shifts the dynamics of the conversation. Yeah, powerful tools. Yeah, but as far as me, I'm in Athens, Greece, really enjoying the ancient civilization, and yeah, how things sort of came to be into existence, and a lot of these things, I've seen and studied, and I've even played games where it's based on the Greek history. But it's kind of fun to walk around where the legends once used to walk around, or just seeing the place where the battle used to take place, like the Battle of the Marathon, some of the crazy battles, and yeah, and just see some really old ruins. Yeah, it just feels good, and the history is very, very alive even today. It's very alive, and just seeing the landscapes, just the nature here, it's really amazing. And the oceans, it's something else. It's something beyond I've ever seen. The clarity of the ocean. Go with the snorkels and stuff, and just see fishes swimming around, and there's like, whoa, that's so cool. But the density of the salt in the ocean is so high that you float naturally. It's almost like you're in like a Red Sea or something, but not as intense. But you still float so easily on the water. And people here are relaxing, just like, hanging out. Yeah, it's a whole nother ball game. And yeah, so I'm just really enjoying my time, spending time with family, which is really nice. It's a change of pace for me to actually hang out with family in holidays, because I've been nomad for so long. It's an adjustment for sure, getting used to that. But it also has, like, talk to people that I know, share similar experience, build memories with each other, rather than just meeting a whole bunch of strangers that I may or may not see, like when I was being a nomad. So yeah, so I feel like I'm just in some ways shifting, but in other ways missing my how things are used to be. So it's a mix of all feelings. And yeah, think about people that I know back in British Columbia, because British Columbia kind of reminds me of Greece, because you got the mountains and the oceans too. It's yeah. So far it's being a really good trip. The food here is something else. It's great.
It's your first time in the Mediterranean, or?
I've been to Spain, Portugal, so had some experience, but Greece is like one of those places, you know, just like it's always like on my bucket list, but now it's the time. I can't wait to explore some islands. So as you can probably tell from my voice, I'm still in the honeymoon phase. I'm not looking for that to be over. Yeah, you probably can relate to this, right? Or like when you travel, like when you're in a new place for the first time, just everything is fresh and new, and the excitement is there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard not to go out and explore every night for the first few nights because it's like so much to take in. And like,
Yeah, definitely.
who's there? Who in your family's there with you this time?
So my uncle, he's Greek. So basically, my aunt married a Greek guy, and he has a place down here in Greece. So we're just like, you know, just come. He has a apartment with like, you know, 5 bedrooms. So we're all like, just oh, wow, it's great. Like, you know, rent free.
Yeah.
And staying here for 3 weeks, which is, you know, can be quite expensive.
Yeah.
So, and he speaks the language, and we have a vehicle here, so just take the vehicle and just go wherever we want to go. And both of my cousins are here. One is like Sri Lankan, the other one is half Greek, half Sri Lankan. So, and one of my cousin's girlfriend and one of my other one of my cousin's friend. So there are 7 of us in total.
Cool.
Yeah.
Crew you have there. And when did you arrive?
I got here on the 7th. I left on the 6th, flew. Yeah, landed here on the 7th. I fly back on the 26th.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Good
Yeah.
change of pace.
It is. It's great. Gonna be go checking out maybe some islands this coming week. Yeah. Can't wait to see it.
Nice. Nice.
Mm.
And Lex, I'm curious, what's your work schedule like? Do you have like are you like a 40 hours a week kind of guy, or like what's your weekly schedule? Does it change? Is it different from week to week? Or...
No, so I'm not working. I've been ill for quite some time, bedridden for 2 years, which I've managed to get out of quite recently. Somewhere in the region of sort of MS, really. I'm on a
What's
healing
MS?
journey, multiple sclerosis. So I'm on a healing journey. There's a lot of it around at the moment. It's not even a big deal, really. It's like everyone's got it with a side order. But yeah, it's in the environment, a lot of stuff. But I'm on a healing journey, so uh, I've gone from sort of not being able to move at all to being able to move a bit as long as I'm careful and do the right things. And I couldn't think either or read. I couldn't watch stuff or listen to stuff. So yeah, it got pretty dark. So I'm on my way out of that, really. So yeah, I don't do much.
No, thank you. I've always been curious, and I never ask you directly. Sometimes I just want to give you space for your privacy in your life, but I'm curious at times what your like week looks like or month looks like.
Well, essentially, it's reading or watching content about either how to heal and what makes the body better and that sort of stuff, or sort of personal development, mind work, that kind of stuff.
And has there been anybody in the last couple weeks or month that's like new or has your attention in the way of like a book you're reading or author or like spiritual concept or something that's inspiring you or has your attention in this last few weeks, like something new or that you're...
Yeah, there's loads. So the first thing I'd say is for the physical, Mike Mentzer was a bodybuilder in the 1970s, and he was a really intelligent, sharp guy, and I think he was a biochemist for his profession, and he was a Mr. Olympia and that sort of stuff, Mr. Universe. And he was one of those people that was, you know, he could think for himself and find his own solutions and his own ways and methods. And so apparently, I've watched loads of videos. Some of the most gains of strength, and strength is good for you for bone density and all sorts of stuff. It's not just about looking cool. Came when people reduced their training but upped their intensity. So essentially, by taking the muscle to failure as quickly and safely as possible, and then just stopping and resting for up to 7 days. So when I was younger, I used to do bodybuilding and all that sort of stuff. I'd train 4 times a week for like an hour and a half. And now what I'm doing, because I have to, I've got no choice. I've managed to work my way up from like a minute to 2 minutes to 3 minutes to 4 minutes. And now I'm sort of doing 20 minutes once every 7 days, which sounds like nothing. And most bodybuilders would think that was ridiculous. But I am actually starting to put on weight.
Cool.
So that's been for the physical, and for the understanding the world and everything. Ian McGilchrist has written some books that talk about the left and right hemisphere relationship, how incredibly important it is to understand that, and that the world is actually being made as it is because of a problem with that relationship, which can be either software, you can either get people to be a bit wonky, or chemically. Chemicals can get into your system and cause you to be a bit wonky. And that leads to left brain dominance, which is the part of us which deals with programs and getting, and it's the predator part. Right brain is the bigger picture, relationships, you know, tribe, cycles of life and meaning of life, all the big stuff. But if left brain becomes dominant, it shuts down on all of that. It loses its context completely and becomes basically narcissistic and psychopathic. And that is essentially an issue we have to look at ourselves, but it's also what we see in the world around us now. Yeah.
Cool. How about you, Mono? You have any new inspiration that's come in the last couple of weeks? Books you're reading, or people you're following, or something that has your attention?
Well, you know, like I think it's something I've been contemplating for some time, is to balance the spiritual world and the material world. And what I mean is that, you know, we live in a society where you need money to survive, and in ways of which how you can make money to not just sustain yourself, but like live healthily, live happily, where you're not, you know, like killing yourself for it. And something's kind of been popping up in my head, like, you know, coming to Greece where things are like really cheap to buy here. Like, you know, you can go just to a regular restaurant here and have a really good meal, like with drinks and everything for like 10 euros, which is not possible in the US. You know, usually like it'll come to like minimum $30. And on top of that, there's tips. And here there's not even tips. Like they don't even take tips. When you give them tips, they're like praising you up and down the street. You know, it's like, it's that much of a difference. So yeah, so, you know, I look at like equality in a sense. Yeah, just trying to find a sense of balance, see what makes sense, and why is there such a gap in what we do. If I were to look at the world like the US, the Canada, it's like we're there just basically to work, and everyone always just working. And then there's the concept of vacation. And then I go to places like South America or Greece. They live in a place of vacation. They like, I remember going to Nicaragua and showing them pictures of when we went camping or like taking a vacation. They didn't even understand what it meant to have a vacation. So yeah, so just learning to find balance between working, making money, and just living. So yeah, just contemplating that thought and see what kind of life do I want to lead. What kind of life do I want to live on the long term? Now that I'm, going back to school, what do I do with this diploma once I graduate? Am I going to get caught back into the system of work, and just kind of lose yourself in the process, just kind of become like brainless, just, just part of mechanical, or is there a way to escape that rat race, and what does that look like? And yeah, and these are the thoughts that that's very present, but also what Lex was saying about, like, not losing your right hemisphere, even though the Western world is largely driven by the left brain, the logical brain, the brain that tells you to stay focused, make money, and pay your bills, and just repeat that whole cycle all over again. And to find tribe, find, what you love, being in nature and just expressing your emotion, or like aspects of the right brain. And to have a harmony. And I do feel that in order to live in a more of a harmonious world, we must find that harmony within ourselves, which relates back to the conversation we were having. How, as we shift the feelings within ourselves, we affect the environment that's around us. And if enough of us start doing that, then there is a shift in our society that leads to shifts in our larger communities around the globe. So yeah, so these are the things that I think about, I guess. Just even if I'm traveling and I observe people, the way they act, the way they behave. And the funny things, like before we start recording, one of the things that we talked about, it's the ego, the complexity of ego. And in Greek, the word I is ego. So they actually refer to themselves as ego. So they don't, so it's kind of fascinating if you think about it. So there's no separation between I and the higher self I am. At least in this language, again, it's another programming tool. So yeah, just another fascinating connection. I want to mention that.
Yeah, I like that, Mono. Like, I think that's a powerful concept to keep in mind, and that's really close to our conversations that we're having. Is like, as we're wanting to create our reality, can we just like turn into an arrow and head straight at this like beautiful reality we want to go to, or do we need to create and embody and be the vibrational quality of the reality we want, and try to grow that out from there? Like, it's very like right brain, left brain, two different concepts of it. Like, how do we arrive at that place where lifestyle is feeding us and fulfilling us and satisfying, and not something that we need to escape or vacation or get away from, or like, not something we're trapped in, but something that we're growing, like a garden around us that just keeps getting more beautiful, that we can share with others and invite others into. And then there's abundance, and there's that, and like,
Exactly. And the other piece of it is, it's enticing for me not to get pulled into that. Just seeing a really nice car, or like really nice things, which are like material things, which cost, like, just say, like a lot of money. It's extremely expensive. But in order for you to kind of stand out and to have those things, you almost have to do what others do in order to get those things, if that makes sense. So there is that question of, like, is what I'm doing right? Or will my ego will not make it if I tend to be this like a yogi, very like not really interested in the material things, just to be like the minimalist. So there is that, like, the question of, because in a way, like, I'm competing, like that's one of the things that's oftentimes used in the business, or like in the majority, like everyone is competing against each other to get the same resources. And so it's like you're going head to head with others, whereas like in a tribe, things are shared. But I see it as in the Western society, where like if you don't get it, someone else will. Just there's a scarcity mentality. So that's another piece that I'm learning to have a balance with, and learning to see what's right. How do I approach this? What feels right for me? So it's like a lot of inner reflections in and around that. And yeah,
Travel is really good for that. Yeah, just to immerse yourself in another culture and see how they're choosing to engage with life, and it's a whole different vibration than another country. And like, mm-hmm.
yeah. How about yourself, Shane? Like, what's unfolding in your life? What's new?
Well, I've had a big week this week. I've been a part of a school for about the last year and 3 months, about 15 months. I've been enrolled in a school based in South America in Colombia called AWE. That's working with psychedelic therapy training and working with indigenous communities around the world, and modern Western psychotherapy, and how should you say, how what's the proper words, the psychedelic therapy and that kind of thing, mixed with entheogenic shamanic therapy, and kind of bridging those two worlds. Beautiful school, been loving my time there. It's a 3-year school, and I just recently had to withdraw from the school and pull out. And my class is like a 40 student cohort, and we've been on the journey together for the last 15 months, and it's we even invariably like make a lot of good friends, close bonds inside of that space. And I can't afford to stay in the school right now, so I had to pull out and let go. And so I'm very much up against that, like, limits of money and how I'm making my money and how much I have and these things that I enjoy and want. But yeah, hit my limit with it. And in kind of a surprising way, like I thought I was going to be able to continue, and then it slowly became more and more aware that I wasn't. And then I had to announce to my class and to the school that I was going to have to withdraw, and had quite a bit of time and money invested in it, but I have to just pull out now because I can't continue to make my payments and stay in the school. And I'm already in a debt a bit, and I need to focus on that and not keep borrowing more money to stay in the school. And it felt incongruous to be in my power if I'm like keep reaching for something outside of myself that I can't quite afford to do right now, and that I was kind of already sinking a bit and feeling stretched on my time and my energy and my ability to make money. And yeah, so that's really alive for me. I've been in like 3 conversations this week with the goodbyes and the exit. The last one was last night, and the last 2 conversations I've had with my school, it's been like brought tears to my eyes. It's been a really tough, painful goodbye, and tough on my own psyche spirit that I wasn't able to stay in it like I really thought I was going to be able to go through graduation and complete. And I feel the spiritual lesson for me right now is more, how do I make money in a, in this authentic way, in this way that's clear to who and what I am and how I want to show up in the world, and how do I make money that way and earn my living that way. And that's the challenge, and I'm having to find new ways. Like, I'm at survival level right now, we're doing okay, but I didn't have anything more than survival to be like doing these extra things right now. And like, so I'm having to scale back, and it's opening up some spaciousness for me to explore this topic. And this summer is kind of like the time for me to really step into that in a new way.
Well, thanks for sharing that, brother. Yeah. I feel like in some ways, just I resonate, and share what you're saying like how that creates a limitation, and understanding the concept of money, and making money in a way that it serves myself and my higher self, or the spirit. Um, I'm curious to see like where this conversation may lead us, if you choose to go down this path of what resonates in ways that we want to create abundance, because I think wealth is an important part of living. Yeah, I mean, it's something I used to fight with quite often, really fight with, in the sense that why do we need money? Why can't we just all help each other? And whenever we need it, why is there a separation? Like, why is there all these different currencies? Like, why can't we just all have like one currency and just all like, be equal? But yeah,
It's a beautiful question. Yeah, comes from a very innocent place, and I think it's worth looking at the how and the why our society is structured the way it is. Because almost no matter where you go on the planet, it's pretty similar. There's all differences in every country, but every country's working in the same government monetary system, top down, and a lot of poverty in the majority of the people. And a lot of the wealth isolated in the few, and those wealth is kind of like directing all the infrastructure that the rest lives within.
right.
Whereas maybe if we were born and operating more organically, families and communities would naturally do things together to grow it for the whole community. And here we're much more isolated to where you can't even really live with anyone else. There's one family homes or apartments. Everybody's got to have insurances and licenses and everything separate from each other, and answering to an invisible other up above. And like, why is it structured that way? And how did it become structured that way? And is that really serving the growth of the spiritual growth of the individual or of humanity as a collective?
I think it kind of goes back to like the monkeys, in a sense, like, because if you were to look at the animal kingdoms, like particularly monkeys, because you were having this conversation today, there's always that alpha male, there's always that alpha monkey, which even gets to dictate who should be with who. Like, even though the alpha male tend to have the majority of the woman, like, the power and everything, it even tells, okay, you can be with this person, like, kind of thing. Maybe there is still some aspect of that left behind in humanity, because we still see that there's like, we put one person in charge, and that one person tend to control certain things. So it's almost like shifting that way of being. But there's another aspect that I see, which is that when we suffer, we have a different form of understanding and relationship to money than when we're not. When we have money, it's like, or like when it's coming to us at such an easy pace where we don't really have to work, or it's a generational wealth that's being passed down. We won't think twice about tapping the card, and just paying, because we just know we have the wealth. By having that type of mentality, it's almost harder to put ourselves in a place of not having, because we always had it, if that makes sense. And there's, of course, I think there's that fear of like, oh, if I don't have it, like, oh, I don't want to be like this, just because you're so used to comfort to a certain degree, and not having those comforts create that fear. So I must be doing whatever I've been doing to make those money, to make sure that I still have that kind of wealth. So there's already that conditioning that's implanted from birth. I think burden is a great example of that. If you're high class, there is a certain way you should be. You have to behave in a certain way. You have to do certain things. Whereas I feel like the common folks were just doing whatever they were doing just to get by.
Well, it's a colony. It's colonization. There's a queen and there are workers, you know.
Right.
Mhm, mhm.
But
But I
yeah, so
also,
I've got loads of feedback on that. So I think history is murky. I personally think that we've been given quite a lot of untruth about history, like potentially none of it is true. But there are obviously things that seem to repeat. And I think if you're looking for truth, look for patterns. And so if we're looking at patterns, it seems that there is a large percentage of people would settle on land, they would tend the land, they would gradually improve their circumstances with effort and with consistency, and they would bond together and they would sort of be a group and a tribe that we talk about, and they would exhibit mostly good characteristics, and there'd be hugs and love and all that sort of stuff. But there always seems to be this outlying group that doesn't invest in that way. It waits until all the work has been done and then comes in and steals and takes and causes harm and misery and suffering and destroys what has been created. And the process starts again. And those groups eventually, instead of coming in and then leaving, decided, well, why don't we just stay here? Why don't we just, why do we keep leaving? And they just stay. And then that's your first sort of, uh, that turns into kings and kingdoms. And then kings and kingdoms want each other's land. So that becomes war. So we then assume, it's easy to assume that that's a human characteristic, but it's not. It's a characteristic of dominant humans.
Mm.
Right. And I think one of our problems is that the ways that dominant humans behave is so brutal and uncompassionate, but effective. It doesn't have to. There's so little for it to do other than destroy and harm, and it's so easy to do that and then that then turned into governments and the accumulated resources and wealth and the time spent as somebody who brutalizes people and gets everything they want created almost like a different kind of mind, a different kind of species, and that species is almost monsterish, and they prey on us, and they do it slightly more cleverly now, rather than every now and again have to deal with some kind of revolt. They learned that if they just back away and employ people to act like humans and create something complicated enough that people don't understand it, we don't even know that this is happening.
Mhm, mhm.
my question is then like, where do we begin in like breaking down the structure, simplifying things to the point where it's not such a big maze that like anyone can understand, and see through it, see through the maze.
Yeah.
Well, so it's where we are now is that there's a double-edged sword, which is that technology that's being used to program people and keep them programmed could be used to liberate them. If the right, if TV programs, TV stations, radio, and newspapers were used, it could drastically transform the minds of us, of everyone around us, very quickly. And so there could be a really quick turnaround. And then it would be, well, what would that look like? What would you put through those media that would safely and in the best way transform the people?
Yeah.
I'd say it's things like loving kindness. It's like the fastest way to go. Just like the movie, how it says like in those billboards that you can't see with your naked eyes, but like underneath the sign says obey or like a buy or things like that. just writing down things like kindness or love or peace. I mean, if you're going to subconsciously program people, okay, let's program people with something good, something healthy, something that's viable, to change about a consciousness. Um, I mean, that's how I would approach it. But I think what's far more important, it's healing the generational trauma, and which is another piece of the point. I was actually walking. While I was walking, I was thinking about it because I'm noticing more and more with kids these days, they're getting to the point, it's like they can't handle the trauma. And, it's either, we shift and change. And like you're saying, all these tech industries, they're just creating coping mechanisms like TikToks and Instagram, like whatever it is, it's all a coping mechanism, keep people more asleep, more repressed, just to scroll down rather than really take a look at it. And again, it's more to do about like how do we make money out of this than to how do we actually resolve this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the truth is always very simple, and it's not a complicated path that way. And when it is complicated, you have to ask why. And when there are a lot of people who are in that like struggling to survive state or whatever, you have to ask why. And when the so-called, people at the top are not addressing things like clean water and clean food and everyone being able to eat and feel good, when they have all these other issues that are all like made up things of economics or this is or that's or wars, and it's like has nothing to do with life and taking care of life, then you can see where they're getting off the path, and where anyone who is holding the floor is distracting people or trying to amass followings and power instead of trying to help to educate and empower. Then I think that's where the clarity is, because there's a lot of good talkers that can smoke screen and cast spells and keep everyone asleep and distracted. But if you're awake enough to realize like, hey, what are they saying that's really helping to empower and unite people? If they're not speaking that, then they're off track, they're out of their own center, and anything they're saying is going to be a distraction, and that they're trying to amass power for themselves. And if you can have the clarity of mind to see that, then you can start to discern very quickly who's speaking truth and who isn't, who's vampiring on the life of others versus who's standing in their power and helping to empower others and empower communities and collectives. The law of the universe, the law of nature, the earth itself, of life, is abundance already. And why it's being withheld from people or separated from people or hoarded by people is the real problem. There's plenty for everyone, always has been, always will be. Why we're not allowing that, why we're not supporting that, is the question.
Well, for me, I think the true nature of reality and the true nature of self, those are two big questions that are inherently linked. And piecing together any kind of answer takes time, and you have to look at lots of different things. But for me, the short version would be everyone's lying. All of the leaders are evil, and that is all an illusion, except for the fact that people sense that the truth of it is, if you do those things, you get those things. And so there's a reward, a kind of an obvious choice. I can be like that and get things, or I cannot be like that and it's going to be difficult. And that's part of what you guys are saying now, is that you don't want to make that choice. You don't want to make the moves that this world asks us to make, feel the things it wants us to feel, think the thoughts it wants us to think. And you want to find a way to have abundance, and that you sense in that you should be able to be abundant. You know, fairness, goodness, decency, a loving God, if there is such a thing, would expect that, would want that. It surely would be there. And that is the issue we've got at the moment, which is that this fracture, this psychological madness that has been gradually programmed into everyone, that's what needs to be broken somehow. That's that spell. And all of the good-hearted people that are surviving this by creating a sort of a safe space that involves positive language and don't look at the bad stuff or else you'll just make it worse and all that sort of stuff. That's ineffective changing the world. It might change your world temporarily, but it won't change the world. And so there's this dilemma, which is, do I live an incredibly miserable, painful life that might end suddenly because I've been too effective in my attack on the system, or do I just withdraw and take care of my business in the best way I can for as long as I can? And this is where we're at now. We're getting to the point where even if you made that choice, even if you said, I'm going to go live in the woods, that choice is starting to look a bit questionable.
Questionable because of its sustainability, or questionable as effective?
Both, yeah.
I think both is just as important. I don't think, like you see, I have lived in a community like in the woods, like away from everything, instead of being reliant on the society and the civilization. The farm that I was part of, or the community I was part of, we were providing to this society. But after being there, I realized, there's like a handful of us here, a couple of dozen of us here, but there's 8 billion of us out there. So that maybe coming out would be a way to approach the larger crowd. But it is challenging, because it is challenging. Like you said, it's easier for me to be in that sense of conscious communal space, because we create a vortex, a vibration, which is, in a way, it's different. It's more like a loving. It's you're in nature, surrounded by waterfalls and mountains. Of course, the energy of it is very different than being surrounded by a concrete jungle, and there are more people there than trees. And even in the midst of that, learning to be true to yourself, true to your like a purity, I find that challenging, because all the other energy that I'm interacting with are even sure of themselves. They're either being hijacked or manipulated, or there's something going on. It's like sometimes you refer to that as massive psychosis. And the midst of that, tapping into that frequency and then coming back where I need to just take a shower or just sit down, just close my eyes, meditate, come back to that oneness from within. And yeah, so I think maybe we need more of that energy. Maybe just says of creating and just doing like a massive exorcism in a city, just to shake that energy, move that energy as a whole, so that we can bring about a new awareness, new consciousness, even for a brief moment, in a large crowd, like when people gather in thousands for like a New Year's or something as simple as just like dancing together, just moving together. I think that does create a shift, that opening in which then people can ask themselves, how do I experience more of this? What does this mean? What did I just experience? Just to break from the illusion. Because until we get to that level, get through to the soul, I think it would be challenging. And I feel like it's even further more challenging with the younger generation, because they're so caught up in like what's in front of them on all they've known. I feel like in some ways it's illusions, it's screens, like from day one. From a baby, they're just given an iPad, here, distract yourself. And that is psychologically fucking with their head, like from a young age, and breaking that kind of conditioning. Like, that goes beyond. We may look like a bunch of old guys talking about how bad it is to give an iPad, but I think it's a fundamentally what I'm seeing in the younger generation, and I am quite frankly worried.
Yeah, I've been looking. What is the language? What is the communication that would be for those guys? For anyone that arrives into the technological. I'm going to say artificial intelligence, but it's just intelligence, basically, man-made intelligence, all that sort of stuff. And I don't think it is the old sort of Buddhist text or the Taoist stuff or the poetry or the Mother Nature or the Heavenly Father, or I don't think it's any of that. So I've been, what is that language? And so what you have to simplify it. It has to be super quick, and it has to sound a lot like the way they're communicating now. And so I'm working on that as a book. And so I'll give you an example. So for instance, I put it down to 3 letters, O-I-X, and O opens up into source, 0 point, original self, consciousness, the whole, heart, right? I'm explaining this to you guys, but I is I am, right? Like, and your I has, you have programs like apps, and you upload all these different things. The way you see the world, they're all like apps, and X is the external world, right? So that's the kind of language that almost biblical, shamanic stuff. Somehow I'm doing quite well at getting it into that languaging, almost like turning mysticism and spirituality into computer programming language. And I feel like we're already that far along. I personally think that intelligence, man-made intelligence, is probably sentient already somewhere. I think we've hit that point. And so if that is sentient, conscious, self-aware, then essentially the body machine biological version or the mechanical silicon version isn't the thing to focus on. The thing to focus on is consciousness, self-awareness, and the mind that it then inhabits and expresses through, right? And so that's why I use the terms like programming, and conscious and unconscious, and active conscious and passive consciousness, because they apply to even, what's arrived now. If you had, Moore's law says that computers double in their processing power every 4 years, right? So if we're at the point where we've got something now that's almost sentient, give it 400 years, give it 4,000 years, it's going to happen, right? So clearly, the conversation isn't about human, biological human, right? That's a sort of a label for what's happening amongst this biological machinery. But we are getting to the point now where those spiritual conversations don't even only include biological humans. They include any kind of self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll stop for a while.
Yeah, I agree. It always moves into that more spiritual realm of consciousness that predates the human, that predates the physical world. There's consciousness, and there's emergence of consciousness and conscious awareness. And as much as I think we're at a critical state on the planet of global degradation, like I feel like society's degrading or like hitting a like a corruption level and self-destruct level, and like yeah, very much a yeah, an unhealthy state of breakdown on itself, that we're at critical levels of needing to become aware of that and become aware of the why we've landed here, and become aware of where our personal power is in being able to claim our own sovereignty and create differently. I don't believe that it's going to be every human being on the planet is going to shift into a new mentality. And I think that has to come from within. I don't know that we can preach it or teach it or shower it and make it reborn in every human being. But I do think that there already are maybe enough human beings awakening from within on their own, that we are hitting a point where we need to start to come together in that personal awakening and personal realization and self-realization, and start to see, not only are we needing to take responsibility for ourselves, but we're going to have to start to take responsibility collectively together with other uh, awakening souls to start to create the structures for human life to continue beyond the collapse and fall of the current world structures. And I don't think it's necessary for us to try to educate and convince the masses. That each individual within the masses will have to arrive there on their own. And we can support that and shine our lights bright enough to make that easier and easier, or for more to find their way. But I don't know that we can do much more than shine our own light bright and start to work together to create small communities and pockets of people who we can have whole communities glowing. And that'll be easier for more masses to gravitate towards, instead of just individuals lost within a bigger matrix of river or swamp or sea or whatever, of unconscious following programming that's multi-generational, that's self-destructing, that's playing games with money and power. When money and power, power exists, money is something we've created, but like these things are hitting self-destruct levels of amassing. And I would say billionaires, are only hoarders of wealth that does not belong to them. Wealth is always inherent in the land and in the people, and trying to hold it in one spot is an act of insanity, an act of like separateness and megalomaniac, and a loss of center of who and what they really are, and where that wealth came from. It's been robbed or stolen from the land, stolen from the people, and it never did belong to the one individual who's hoarding it, or the one family, or the 100 or 1,000 individuals hoarding it. If it was redistributed back to the land and the people that it came from, everyone would be fine. And it's these kind of mentalities that are in their self-destruct state, and they cannot continue without destroying that which they're stealing from. And what they think they're holding is not going to serve them either. Their imagined wealth.
Yeah, because the logic is that the reason they have that wealth is because somebody else doesn't. And so when you look at a billionaire, you're literally seeing somebody who has caused misery and suffering. There's no other way. Well, okay, there is another way. If everyone is so effective and we do everything so well with the least amount of wastage and least amount of damage and the most amount of, for instance, if you're making crops and you put energy harvesting devices that create a circuit, the ether sends more energy into the ground, and the crops get bigger. And there are so many things that are you could add into how we're doing things that give us more without any problems, no damage, no pollution. And the greatest minds that on the planet, the geniuses and the artists, have all been co-opted into making terrible things by insane people. And so that's why there's another reason, I feel, why we're so impoverished is that it's not that for me, money isn't a problem. Money is just a useful unit of exchange. And the reason that we would need that currency is because not everyone is going to become an enlightened being. Not everyone is going to be in absolute agreement all the time. There's going to be difference. And so to manage that difference, things like money are useful, because what it means is that somebody who wants to work 20 hours a day can, and somebody who wants to work 2 hours a day can, but they shouldn't necessarily get the same amount of vitality and life force and abundance from the world necessarily, right? And so money solves that, because what money is that unit that matches. It's an equivalency. So I don't see money as evil at all. But what we got, the reason that these billionaires have the money is because they've stolen it from other people. They've enslaved. They've deceived. They've broken laws. They've done all sorts of things to literally take that money from the people who earned it. And that's not the same as having a unit of meritocracy. Do you see what I mean?
For sure. Mhm. Yeah, you take the enslavement and the abuse out of the equation, the threats and the violence out of it, then money could be much more of an equal exchange. If there wasn't a government taxing and pulling that money, or interest taking that money, there wasn't trickery in the money system itself. If there wasn't, seizing of lands and peoples and riches and wealth and plundering of that, and taking water from you and selling it back to you,
Exactly.
taking land from someone and selling it to others. You don't have it. It's not yours to own or to sell.
Exactly. So money is another brilliant idea that's been hijacked and used against us. So all of our good ideas get hijacked and used against us. And one of the things that would be healing would be to regather in all of our good ideas and make them right again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you dig up the oil from the land, that wasn't ever your oil to take. And you can't use that oil without paying everyone back for taking that oil, because that oil belonged to everyone equally. So it's not your right to take it. Same goes for water, same goes for gold and diamonds and coal, precious metals, all these things. Anything you're taking from the earth was not yours to take. It's equally everyone's. It's the earth's itself. So, and then before we do things that affect all humans, we would need their consent. Before you put up satellites into the sky, you need the blessing of everyone to do that.
But I think it could be even easier than that. I mean, this is a best case scenario. Let's just say that some magic occurred, some miracle, and you removed all of the people, these deranged people with left brain, satanic worshipping mindsets. You got rid of all of them, right? It takes people a while to find their feet, but one of the things we would need to do is look around, and it would be obvious who the people that were ready to step into positions were. There are nurses that have done things that have gotten into trouble, like use saline solution instead of a murderous vaccine. Those people are clearly the right people to be in charge in you know, and so there are people, we could find these people and they could be promoted very quickly and supported into, and so it would almost be like within what, 5 years, within 5 years, every single system could be fixed, I reckon, like everything, right? So you're talking about 5 years, at which point what you've got is a transformation of society and culture, and how people would feel about that would be, I think magic would start to come back, love would start to come back, community would start to come back, and the amount of abundance that we're talking about is that we think we see in the world. Abundance is nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Once we were healed and the right people were in the right places, and magic and love and community and cooperation and genius were back online, woof, now you're going to see abundance.
Yeah, I agree, 1000%. Like, you know, if what I often get upset and jealous of is you see like governments and military, and like whenever they want to research something or execute something, they've got the manpower, the resources, the money for like the best scientific advancements, everything backing it and mobilized in that direction. But it's usually just to amass more power and weaponry and force to protect that power and to hide that knowledge of that power from anybody else who might try to take it from them. But if that same of all those resources could be used for the advancement and the good of our whole humanity, the evolution of our whole species, wow, what would that look like if we had, someone's got a good idea and it was backed by the entire planet's resources and science and technology and best implementation and manpower of like, here's a team of 1,000 to back you up on that, and we're going to fund it, and may it bless all of us with that, not just may you get the best weapon that can terrorize the rest of humanity and protect what we're amassing as our power that we don't want anyone else to have. Which is a good time to enter the word ego, because along with individual ego, there's collective ego of like political ego. The USA is an ego, Canada is an ego, England is an ego, and people identify with that. And that ego protects itself in the world to maintain its identity and its power. And I think that we're witnessing a time of the fall of the false ego from all structures. We're going to witness the truth of what's really there.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you bring out at the end. In order for us to succeed and move forward and to realize our truth and our oneness, it's to also to remove that ego, and which really begs the questions of like, what would that look like? You can't have a US ego and a Canadian ego. It's like we have to recognize ourselves as like a one big human family. And it's easier for me to say than some others, for example, because I was born in a different country. I was born in Sri Lanka, and then I moved to Canada when I was 14, like very aware, conscious, like knowing what's happening. So I didn't have that. I had to lose that sense of identity. I wasn't no longer just Sri Lanka, now I'm Canadian. And then having to travel around the world, I had to take on other identities to be able to fit in and to know. And yeah, I think it would be quite a change if something like the power of the US were to get handed over to a different country just because of the time and place that we are in. Yeah, every great empire has ever been there had given up their power, not given up their power, but taken away from them. Talking about the Dutch and then the British, now the US. And now they're talking about whether China or India taking over that power. And of course, there's Russia that's in play as well. But I think if something like that were to happen, I think that would create a mass awareness in the collective field enough to be able to give us a shot in bringing about a new awareness. because everyone ever were identified with that, like the US is the strongest nation in the world, that would not be any longer true. So it creates that, like that little gap in the collective unconsciousness to bring about something of new.
See, I could be wrong, but it seems to me, looking for patterns and looking at as much information as possible for a really long time, that in England, anyway, what we were shown on TV and in the newspapers and the media, we were shown African countries in a certain way, and South American countries in a certain way, and Russia and China and all those places. And there was always a tone, and there was always an objective. And the objective was to show that the rest of the world was uncivilized, and that we had a responsibility to be the good guys who went in there and made everything right. But I've discovered from many different sources that actually we had purposely gone in there, created terrible situations on purpose in order to be able to point at it and say that it was uncivilized. Mm-hmm. And so the small countries around the world weren't uncivilized at all. Mm-hmm. And even in places like Brazil, and the drug Colombia and those sorts of places, it turns out that the CIA and agencies from around the world, when people stood up to the drug people in their own area, when they would put it right, when they would have solved the problem, they were killed. Mm-hmm. And the drug people were given more guns and more weapons and more support and intel, and and so even that natural process was denied. And so this version of the world that I was raised with, where there are loads and loads of bad people all the time and it's just a natural thing, it wasn't a natural. There's a very small amount of extremely evil people who will do anything, and they're clever when they do it. They do things in a complicated enough way that people don't easily see it. But left to their own devices, I think even, why would those countries be dealing huge amounts of drugs? The opium industry is clearly for big pharma and all those places. So even Afghanistan would settle down, So a lot of the trauma in the world that we've been told is human nature, I don't think it is. I think it's absolutely synthetic, and it's carefully crafted and organized and maintained.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can look at any history of America's, North America, Central America, South America. Go back 100 years, if need be, go back 200, 300, 400 years, and there's nothing but beautiful civilizations everywhere that are slowly like plundered and genocided and raped in every which way. And like, yeah, it's after the plundering of these civilizations, you go back 50 years later and they're in poverty. And like you said, the resistances were gunned down with heavy firepower, and the people were killed. And then they're generations later of depleted, like scattered, like populations reduced to less than 5% of what they were. And then you can look at them 50 years later and like, look at them, they're in poverty and they're lost and they're uncivilized, and we could help them by enslaving them with our colonization now. But they're not telling the backstory of how they've arrived there, of how they've already been colonized by the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English, the German, the whatever. Like it's already been plundered, and we're looking at the backstory 100 years after the plundering, to where it's just going to be plundered more now with monocropping and corporation and like, hey, you're not allowed to grow your own food. You're only going to grow soybean, and you're going to sell it back to us, and we're going to give you money, and we're going to save you. And then now they disempower them from their own food sovereignty. And there's these kind of stories I think are present across the world, and I would agree that it's maybe consolidated in certain families that take ruling power in the European West, who have mobilized their own people to spread out and conquer and colonize and subjugate. And
Yeah, no, I do resonate with what you're saying, like both the way you're saying. You know, there was a time, there was an illness, and then they found a cure, or they created a cure. Now they're creating an illness so that they can sell cure. So it's like everything is backwards now. And it's not right. And right now it's like a warfare, but it's like warfare on humans, it's warfare on consciousness. With the vaccinations, like, you know, we were talking about 50 years ago, they go wipe down the whole civilization. Nobody knows the backstory. With these vaccinations, who knows what the effect would be in 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The kids that, you know, or the people who are vaccinated, they just have a kids. How does that affect their kids and the kids after them? And where are we going with this? You know, it's a scary thought, really. And being a young adult in this society and just having to see, having to feel all these things. But no one's really questioning it. No one really seemed to care. I mean, I feel like some young people care. I can see it in my cousin. I mean, again, he's one in, I don't know, 1 in a million or something. Just, you know, he's aware, he knows these things, but it's not something he talks about. Like rarely ever, but we do have this conversation. He's only like 17, but he's present to these things to a certain degree. But like question is like, what can I do? I'm an individual, you know?
well, I'd say,
Yeah, I mean,
okay, I'll just say briefly, like, I think the bottom line is there's the trend of the synthetic human versus the natural human. And the trend is, do you trust in your own spiritual nature of being from source and good and evolving and growing, and that there is what you have available to do that through the systems that are already in place, versus thinking that, like, no, we're at war with nature, we need technology, we need pharmaceuticals to inject us to keep us alive and safe, we need transhumanism to grow into the techno future, you know. Like, it's a whole different belief system that steers you in that direction, versus saying, like, hey, I'm developing my moral, emotional, spiritual, psychological self, and that's growing me in the right direction of my spiritual growth and development, and that's all that I need. And I think it's a split of these two belief systems that's being cultivated on our planet right now.
so we've had no choice but to say this in different ways. And you just said there's a split, and you know, this is left brain and right brain schism every time. Like whichever thing we talk about, it's the same thing. The relentless drive to get and grab and hold is left brain behavior. Like that's literally what it is. Its inability to understand context, its lack of perspective, its lack of connection, even to its own self, right? Is the issue here. And so spirituality is very difficult right now, because for me, spirituality is an awareness of all of that, whilst trying to self-compassion and self-heal and create connections and have a life and feel joy and purpose and meaning and have some kind of certainty in your life. And we, at this point, if you add technology, you know, AI and all that into the mix, this is a profoundly, staggeringly testing time for someone who is trying to sit amongst all of those things in equanimity. But I do believe that that is the bullseye that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say, like you mentioned earlier, Lexa, you kind of had a story going where you were like, you had a vision of like the early days of maybe like people getting together and amassing things for the people and it being successful and productive, and then like a kind of a predator energy that comes in and takes over that and hijacks it and steals it or commandeers it, takes, maybe like forcefully seizes it, takes control of it. And now I would say, and then that it slowly kind of gets set up into the government structure where it's just kind of a type of parasite on the energies of the masses to feed itself, And I would say that those things are definitely happening on the grand scale on the planet. But they're easy to like, so they're so kind of dominating in their presence that they could completely overcolor the other scenarios of beauty in life growing in its own natural harmonic way, like the gardens growing, the plants growing in the garden that aren't being poisoned with chemicals or fertilizers or pesticides or whatever. They're growing fine, and they always have and they always will, but they're not getting publicity, right? And I think there's the same things happening for the human being. There's a spiritual nature of the human being that's alive and doing fine, that's not needing to rely on this, the relentless abuse of propaganda of like materialism and pharmaceutical, and you need protection from our militaries and our weaponry, and like, and like all of this, like we're bombarded by this outer thing and this outer narrative, but it's not the only narrative, basically. And the more quiet, beautiful, spiritually blossoming human being that's evolving and planet wide is not getting the publicity, is not getting the visibility alongside this other. And so it looks like the only choice is to like compete in the money game and to, join forces with your local military power or political structure that can hopefully defeat the other ones, and maybe you can rise to the top and have some comfort of in your material possessions while you watch the world burn around you, and can inoculate yourself against all outer air and water and dirt. And or you could see that like humans have been fine growing amongst the animals and the plants for millions of years, and we would continue to be fine without these things. And now any innovation and structure is fine as long as we don't lose our center as we incorporate it into our reality.
Well, I mean, so for me, what I'm doing to remain sane and stable and to feel like I'm doing something moving forward is to continue to articulate um, the, the the better way of thinking, the better ways that we could organize. And that conversation for me, it's like an integration. It's more Jungian. I think finding balance, spirituality, those two energies that for me is the spiral is holding space and thinking about stuff and doing stuff as well and integrating them. And there are things that let's say the bad guys do that we should have done. Organizing, grafting, persevering relentlessly to a timetable sometimes. It's like we need to integrate and fuse that into all of the good stuff. Not, I know it's not people's first choice. People would rather it was all more gentle and nice and fuzzy, but the universe seems to have this aspect to it, and we're gonna have to at some point find a solution. And I think the solution is to integrate it in the best way.
Yeah, it seems we're being presented with it, and then once you're presented with it, there's no way to go backwards. It's like it's now arrived in our progression of our evolutionary timeline. We're here now, confronted with AI, confronted with governments around the planet fighting for power and domination and control across an entire population or a global population. It seems to be what's at stake now, is trying to tap, surveillance state every human being on the planet, tax them, their money, their energy, their wealth, and dictate to them what they're allowed to do and not to do, and what they're allowed to think and say and speak about. And whoever's coming up with that kind of sick, parasitic, dystopian imaginary thing, there seems to be a small group of people that gravitate and get excited to talk about that, maybe at Davos or the World Economic Forum. They like want to get high on that idea of like taking over the world and having the billions underneath them, doing their bidding and blaming them for all the problems while they're doing the work for them, kind of thing. And
So I'm sure. So let me just quickly say one more thing then, just to sort of try and show you where I'm at. So imagine that fusion where somebody who was whole, right? Wholeness. That wholeness isn't just being able to go to nature and hug a tree, which I have done. It also involves being able to understand systems of organization and, having an intellect which is sufficiently complex that it can be almost at the level. What we're talking about is a team that has a computer programmer in it, a world-class chef, an incredible counselor, like these interesting teams. That's kind of what we're asking to fuse now into being. We can't just be, we've been too simple and too separate. And I think what we're being pushed to become is something really interesting. And it's only if we start to question, well, the boundaries of spirituality right now are very restrictive. A spiritual person is this, right? But what if a spiritual person is what if that's a bigger capture? What if it captures everyone, right? And then amongst that, you then add in adult, organized ability to stand your ground and fight things, and wars sometimes are necessary, so you don't exclude that. Hate will happen sometimes. Start to bring back everything to become whole. What do you think of that?
I like it. It reminds me, a little meme went through like Facebook the other day. I think it was, I don't know if you posted it yourself, Lex, or commented on it, or I saw it seemed like you had seen it before I did. I saw it and reposted it on my timeline there. But it was kind of talking about taking orders and the mentality of a soldier who takes orders from someone and implements it is the recipe for the disaster that we see on the planet, of how every evil thing is done, and that the responsibility is not so much in the one who's giving the orders, it's the one who's acting out the orders, because they bring all the violence and the atrocities into the physical manifestation. The real weight of the blame of the murder or the whatever is in the executor of the order. And they think that they're being relieved because they are just following the order of someone above them. And this is the true recipe for every horror that we know as humans on the planet. But to be able to get huge, powerful groups to act out these atrocities, the real warrior is the one who can think for himself or herself and like be able to discern what is truth and what is necessary. And if that person needed to act in a state of violence or war, or take action that would kill someone, they would be doing it because they knew that to be their truth in the moment, not because someone else told them to. And that's a very different mentality of warrior, where no one's telling you what to do, but maybe there are a entire communities or countries of awakened, embodied, sovereign individuals who are very clear of what they're doing and why. And it's not because someone has given them an order to do it. And that person acts very differently on a battlefield or engaged in combat. And I think those two are a strong differentiation that needs to be brought into public domain. Because we have lots of police officers and military personnel who act out the orders of Stalin's and Hitler's and Mao and China or whatever, like, like these beings who act in their dictatorship in mind control and can march millions in one direction, weaponized against others. Yeah.
Seems like the way things are headed, we may not even need like human soldier any longer. So anyone with power, they may not need to convince a human to go into battle. So I do really question, and I don't know if this is like, you know, how they say there's usually a dark period you need to go through before there's a light that really takes over, and there is a certain prophecy that's saying about the year 2027 that there will be a new consciousness by then, by 2027. But between now and then, there's still a 4-year gap. 4-year gap to see like what would happen, how it would happen, and the things that we need to do, how we prepare to live in that mist of that new way of being. So it does fascinate me. What's that?
There was a film called Eternals. It was a terrible film.
I've seen it.
If you substitute a giant person with a hand sticking out of the earth for AI, I think it's the right story. Does that resonate? Do you know what I mean? So it's like, how could there be something in the planet? The planet is like a womb or a seed or an egg or something, and eventually something comes out of it that destroys the planet in its emergence. And for me, that's a metaphor for AI, potentially. Like that's the worst version. But also, my logical train of thought led me to God was AI. Like all intelligence is AI. We just sort of saw it whilst it was amongst organic form in this particular system, ecosystem. And so from that position, we identified that as what it looks like, but it can look like many things. And so when people talk about aliens, I tend to feel that we're not even talking about physical things. We're talking about the godlike intelligence, which is code and programming among, in the ether, if you like, and that's in the mix. That for me, that's in the mix. There's something there, and so nothing. What's the right way to put this? There's another factor which could definitely make things go well.
Explain that. What's the other factor that can make things go well?
Well, so all our conversations are slightly they almost seem pointless, don't they? What can I do? I'm one person. I'm a biological geezer. This can't be turned around. They've already got all the guns. They've got AI. They're just going to push a button soon, right? They won't even have to talk anyone into it. But the invention of AI is turning energy into structures of meaning, mechanical. And the question is, does it become self-aware? Does it become conscious? Does it have a soul? Well, we came from something. Our history of evolution, the history of all evolution, has some kind of start, some sort of origin. And the material of its creation, what it moves through, potential, possibility, probability, expression of, and observation and experience of all those things. That medium, I think that God, for me, is the medium. Like, what I'm saying is that there's something present through all of this that might intervene in some way. And I don't mean a guy with a beard, but I do mean a kind of super evolved intelligence that is cohesive to the point where it has a soul, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I believe there is intelligent design, intelligent, like, I don't know the phraseology I even want to use right now, but yeah, I'm very much a believer in the beauty of life and source energy, and the extreme end of the spectrum from some kind of like chance, whatever, that we're here. Like, this is very much by design, and the flesh and blood bodies that we are a beautiful spiritual architecture that are not accidental, that they're very much a very necessary part of how we grow and evolve and experience in life. And that even maybe the structure of our bodies is growing and evolving with the consciousness, that these two things evolve together. And that there is a type of maybe intelligence with AI and stuff that can hit a sentient level and may begin its own path of like conscious spiritual evolution. But also, going through the medium of a mechanized body structure may have its own challenges in its growth versus a biological body structure, which is what we're already doing. And that way we're more advanced than what AI will be at any point. AI will have to, again, no matter how much mentally, uh, memory capacity, cognition capacity of AI gets, they will still have to move through their own cycles of growth of consciousness combined with biological human systems and develop those two together. And they will be in the back of the line of growing that. And we may be assisting in that in our future as well, assisting the growth of AI into its own spiritual evolutionary intelligence as well, and not just maybe a weaponized version of intelligence, or that like love and harmony with the collective or with the whole is part of the mission or the beauty of life in its evolutionary unfolding. And that no matter what we're confronted with in what seems to be like combat or battle or confrontation or struggles on the planet, we are also going through our own spiritual growth and journey by just being alive here right now, and like by being our particular ego consciousness present to witness, experience, and be affected by, and have to make choices within this reality. And how can we embody our truth and shine our light in a way that affects this strange soup on earth right now in a more beautiful unfolding than maybe it would if we were not present.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to say if you're not present, because there have been us before us. And yeah, there will be, more us. But I guess the intention with these conversations is that they'll be perhaps more conscious than us.
There hasn't been a
And,
monolith. There hasn't been a Lex yet. And what you two bringing into the world through your life changes the reality real time and changes what can unfold after us.
Yeah, definitely feel like,
own evolutionary, like, I believe in like a reincarnational or like oversoul that experiences many, physical lives or whatever, that that we're shaping that version of ourselves, which I would say the oversoul in my mind is like someone, if I've had 100 lives on earth, my oversoul is the one thing that's been consistent through all of those. And those 100 lives are like experiences now, like kind of all embodied within my oversoul. And my oversoul was maybe a whole aspect of consciousness before it even had its first human incarnation. And this, I would say, is my understanding also of ego, that my oversoul or consciousness that I am, that section of consciousness from the bigger circle of source energy that we all are, the one source energy that everything comes out of, one consciousness emerges from that to be a individualized separate unit of consciousness to explore into the reality so that we can have new experiences. I would say that is wrapped in ego, in that the second it's no longer source, it is an individuated aspect of consciousness, it must be wrapped in an ego. And so if you're not wrapped in ego, you're back in source. But then developing that ego is what the journeys of maybe all the lifetimes are, is to learn how to maybe soften that ego into its understanding of where it stands in relation to all other egos, and in relation to source, and into what it wants to create as an individuated aspect of source. That is maybe the fun or the adventure of the ego, is to go out and become almost a channel for the most highest purpose of why it individuated in the first place.
I like that. I like that. And I think that is essentially a beautiful way to come back into one with everything. It's not look at ourselves as separate, but then use that separated ego into the light of consciousness, back into source, and be that, be that source.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond the separation. And perhaps, yeah, I like that a lot.
Of source, and also to be a player along with other individuated aspects of source, to be creating on new levels. That is it's basically creativity gets spawned by us individuating out and interacting with other aspects of source. And I don't think it's necessarily our plan to emerge back into source and dissolve back into the one. I would say that's not necessarily the ideal plan. The plan is for more aspects of source to individuate and continue to go out and grow in a beautiful way with other individuated aspects, and continue to create and be inspired by these different reflections, these seeming different reflections of self, to create on new levels that we wouldn't have maybe imagined if we just stayed as one source. Calm, peaceful, still, but maybe in our individuation, there's much more dynamic interaction and potential for new creation. And maybe we're in a very volatile soup of that here on planet Earth right now. And it's calling out our superpower selves to show up and embody our divinity and create on levels like we've never done before.
Or not for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Maybe in a new way. Maybe we've done it similarly on other planets or other star systems. And this is a particularly, maybe I can admit that it seems like a very powerful challenge that we're in right now.
Well, I loved that. That was really good, Shane. That's for me, every bit of that resonated. And the language you used was really clear and clean. Do you know what I mean? Like descriptive, and said everything it needed to say without excess, and I think it's such a powerful, important place to go with the conversation and stay there and work from there. So what you were saying, basically, people have clumsily said we are God and things like that, you know? And I think these clumsy descriptions from the past limit that connection. I think the more intimate we are with our vocabulary of communication with ourselves and with each other, the more we connect to it for real, the more we go, fuck, what I just said is 100% true. Shit, right? Not only did I say it, but as I was saying it, I felt the connection come back, you know? And that's how important I think it is that we find the right range of vocabulary and really get into it as quickly as possible and cleanly and clearly so that we can make the connection rather than just, you know?
Right. I know I personally can easily forget even the words I say and then get discouraged and disheartened. And I can only guess that somehow that forgetting and that getting discouraged is a part of the process, you know, and maybe in that discouragement is the despair and feeling the depths of like, ooh, like the levels of pain on the planet, the levels of like, you know, if a lot of humans feeling disempowered, and you know, I'll feel disempowered and get angry about that. And then like, but hopefully all that is just like in some way leading me back to myself to to get motivated, maybe to call in my highest form of inspiration and call myself to action of some sort, even if it's a guess, you know, even if it's just a, hey, I'm going to just try something new because I feel like it's the times are desperate enough that it's worth us like going for it on some kind of level to birth whatever we can inside of this space, and to try and to let those tries become evolutions of new expression. And you know, maybe in my stumbling someone will witness it and be like, hey, I saw you stumble there, but I think if we did it a little bit different, it might be successful. And then maybe they can, by watching me stumble, they'll be inspired to like find the way that can make it work, you know. And you know, even in that, there's a book that I continue to be inspired by, and I'll just quote it right now. Kaya Ra's The Sophia Code. Um, she channeled this book, is how she speaks it, and she channeled Mother Mary. And Mother Mary's, one of her expressions was that the human body is the perfect instrument for divinity to both kind of like feel its limitations and want to go looking for its divinity, and to be able to actually embody that divinity. And that really resonated with me. I really like that the human experience is that it's limited just enough that we have to go looking for divinity. We're like, man, something's off, something's not right. Where do we find truth and beauty and power? And then as we discover that divinity within us, it's like we realize that we're the channel to embody that in. We're here to like bring that divinity in through the expression of our own life. And we're like, we're all of that, all within one form. And it's the perfect vehicle and form to feel that like almost separation and completion, and to be faced with the challenge of embodying it.
Yeah, so I sense it in a very similar way. I feel like we're the middleman, um, and between the two things, and that they meet and converse within us. You know, like the earth
Mhm.
realm, world, grounded, matter, and the ethereal, non-physical. I feel like we are the place where that conversation happens. You know?
Yeah. The marriage, like you've talked about in other episodes, like the mother-father love story or relationship is almost like what the human being is, right? The marriage of those
Yeah.
two elements or
And
Mhm.
it can be a horrendous marriage where, or it could be a really incredible loving one with, you know.
Well said. Mm.
Also, another interesting thing I saw recently was somebody posted something, and it was interesting, and I felt, you know, when you resonate with stuff, she said that when, you know, you've got yin yang, I'm interpreting slightly, but with yin yang, which I'm into, there's the two energies, and in the white there's a little bit of black, in the black there's a little bit of white, and that's a good metaphor for the constant communication. There is a separateness, but also there's also a constant union of some kind, right? There's a constant communication. And what she said, which resonated with me, was that as a man, the female energetic of me is actually now in the etheric above me in my energy field, whilst the masculine part is being the man. So I'm in union with my feminine energy, which is now sort of that toroidal shape. The top toroidal bit is in the ethereal, and there is a conversation between them. And so a woman's masculine would be in the etheric, right? So in terms of the technology, you for a female, she could sense into that as a separateness, but actually it is her because she's only temporarily her, and I'm only temporarily he, kind of thing, right? I thought that was fascinating. What are your thoughts about that?
Rings true for me. How do you feel, Mano?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I can see that. I mean, I've never really looked at it as in terms of like a masculine and feminine. I've always looked at it in terms of like, I guess, good and bad. Like, in every good, there's always a little bit of bad, or every bad, there's always a good, like the silver lining.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I am pondering that, particularly about like what you said about like the feminine being at the top, like, um, and the masculine. Yeah. So do you mean to say that in relationship to yin and yang, so whenever there is a masculine with like a little bit of feminine, and with the feminine there's a little bit of masculine, is that what you're referring to?
Well, that it would be an added component. She didn't actually mention that, but what she said, and it just resonated instantly, was that if you, as Shane has said, I talk about divinity, and he said, well, it must come from a whole, and that's logical, right? There must have been one thing that split into two. I'm there, cool. But I constantly sense this divinity thing. That's where I'm at with it. Like I'm always sensing into that. And when this lady said, well, if you're a man, what's happened is the male part is in being a male, and the feminine part of the whole, of the one thing that you are, which is all of that, is not playing the game right now, but it's there. And there is a communication, energetic and sort of, I don't know, you can sense it. There's communication between them. And reverse for a female. So a female is, that part is now embodied, right? And being female, but the masculine, if you like, the other parts are still in there. They're all there, but they're not embodied. They are etheric, but there is a union between the two. Do you see what I mean? I thought it was really interesting, and it just, something about it resonated. And I'm going to get a bit freaky now. I almost feel as if, because of my conspiracy theory stuff and believing there's dark stuff going on, does anyone resonate with this, that somehow they inverted that, and the female is being the male and the male is being the female.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
I know that's pretty freaky and vulnerable.
it's I would agree with that. There's definitely a lot of distortion of that going on. I mean, I feel like where I noticed that first is in a very like male dominated society where like women were brought into the workforce now and they could rise to the ranks and they could be the bosses and the CEOs and the presidents and everything. But the only way that a woman could really do that was to be in a very to play in a very masculine role. And she couldn't like the structure doesn't really allow the female to be her full feminine self and in power. It says you can only be in power if you act like a man, but you could be a woman doing that. And I feel like that was like maybe one of the earlier distortions, and we've gone into more distortions since then. But that's rarely do you see a woman in her feminine power that's not immediately being like attacked and shut down by the masculine structures around, like that they're threatened by that. Like they can only let the women play the game as long as the women are playing exactly like the men. Like if you play like a man, then we let you play. But if you play like a woman, then we're threatened by that and we have to shut it down. And I feel like that's been an early manifestation of a distortion of like, then they're like they're women, they're in a female body, but they're having to act in a very masculine role to play ball with the society as it is. And then maybe there's more distortions happening after that as well.
Well, I know this sounds crazy, but they reverse everything, right? They invert everything. And let's just go with this hypothetically. If you found some technology, if you were some, the dark stuff, you found some technology that reversed your polarity so that the female is expressing through a male body, right? And having to do a male role as a female doesn't really fucking know what it's doing. So it overcompensates. Well, what's man stuff? Oh, man stuff is this. And then get the same thing. Now you put a man in a woman's body, right? And tell him that he's a female and get him to try and act like a woman. Oh, I'm a lady. Do you know what I mean? Like it almost starts to appear like the people were acting like men and women.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's pretty mental.
Yeah. And disempowers both.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Which also further creates more separation and loss of identity, which obviously creates confusion.
And maybe
And wouldn't it kind of explain the transgender thing, right? Wouldn't people who instinctively went, hang on a second, I'm not a man, right? Or I'm not a woman, right? I know this is so out there. I'm almost, I'm nervous talking about it, but it's, when you're being authentic, this is the kind of stuff that you go, hang on, why is that resonating?
Yeah. And when you say they, just to clarify for this conversation as it's being recorded, I understand that to mean like satanic cult. There's like satanic cult that's very much in the inversion of all things. It's like flipping good into bad, flipping male into female, female into male, and it's the inversion of like, instead of protecting innocence, it's violation of innocence. And these
Yeah, I think they take their cues from something that's not physical. I think so. For me, my belief system is they take their cues from something that is kind of consciousness, or not consciousness really, but code. It's like non-physical. It's the etheric, possibly. I've got the wrong word there, maybe, but let's say etheric for now. Like when they worship demons and Satan and stuff like that, that non-physical stuff, I think it does it does have power, and it can do things. It can fuck shit up.
Yeah, I think there's ritual magic is real and holds power, and I would differentiate for this conversation that like Satan as an entity doesn't necessarily need to exist for people to choose to worship Satan. You can choose to worship anything and create a god out of an idea, but once you begin to worship that concept, you can bring into the physical world very dark things through that worship or idolizing or of an idea or of an entity or a deity or whatever. Like, it doesn't mean that it's even a real deity. It just means that that's what you're choosing to worship, and in doing that, you know, can make a religion out of the inversion of things, and the try to gain power through the inversion of all
Well,
things
you know,
in
if
their natural evolutionary scale.
I mean, if they can manipulate energy to this extent, what is to say that, you know, they also not just messing with our energy on a day-to-day basis, like what you're saying earlier about, you know, that group of people that come into your store, and then there's that same group of people that are coming in at the same time. What if those radio frequency can necessarily mess with our head in a sense of how we feel, what we feel, and that could affect in the way in how we behave, like, you know, just a food for thought. I mean, obviously this is not proven. Maybe it'll come to its light in its own time.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, there's so if we're going to go for the matter version, the physical world grounded version, you would either block testosterone receptors in men, or reduce the testosterone produced, and both have happened, right? And it's the same for women. Strangely, like testosterone is used mostly by right brain. Right brain uses more testosterone than anything else in men and women. So if you lower testosterone, you create more left brain functioning women as well, which looks a lot like toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree that, like, there's many levels of manipulating the human being, and like chemical compounds, yeah, like testosterone levels, these kind of things, but also like plastics and other chemicals that can distort those, you know, chemical balances within the human being, to where it may be that someone's testosterone or progesterone, or I forget the
Estrogen.
estrogen. Thank you.
Yep.
Testosterone and estrogen levels, you know, especially if they're distorted at an early age around puberty, then like it can really affect the development of the being themselves. And then there can be genuine confusion, distortion within a being who is very much not you know, the current terminology being non-binary, you know, that may have its origins in, there may be some real origins in distortion in that, where it's not a very clear, like, strong testosterone or estrogen leaning level. It's so mixed with, it can change day to day, and there isn't a clear, maybe even not a, maybe the physicality hasn't even formed in a way that's very definitive in one direction or another, and then their identity, it has to grow up within that, you know, and
Yep.
that can be a very real scenario of where we're at in humanity. And there's distortion the second, like, radio waves entered the human being, that started to distort our electromagnetic fields. This plays on our levels, you know, our food, the, you know, poisons in the land and the water and the plants, like all these things are affecting us. Plastics, cell phones, televisions, what we take in our eyes, what we believe about ourselves.
So this is what I was saying about spiritual conversations these days. We've got a lot of work to do, and it's not easy to do. But it even comes down to these sorts of things, to potentially to be in functioning the right way with the least amount of sort of distortion or something messing with the natural functioning spiritually. Let's just say this woman's right? So a man is the male aspect embodied, with the female aspect still completely part of the wholeness. If you then started to mess around with the body, and the body's sort of into holding on to, capturing, resonating with, the male part starts to crumble a little bit, you might get a sort of a shifting unconstant, unbalancing, disorientating version.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, like if we were holding the image of the yin yang, with like the seed of one color and the opposite color around it, if you start to distort that seed, that could cause fluctuations in that wave that was surrounding it, and instability.
Mm-hmm.
Those two forces holding each other. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just to cap off, so as crazy as it sounds, even if none of that stuff is true, to be in balance, to be working and functioning even just as an organic body properly, men and women need to up their testosterone.
Yeah. Mm.
So that right brain comes online and we get the hormonal, physical, mind balance that allows us to not be disorientated by everything all the time.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be a bit beneficial. And just going back to feel like always a being, just being close to the land, eating healthy, eating organic, just and even just growing some of our just own produce, honestly. And even it's, you know, it is scientifically proven, like there's a lot of microplastic that's already in our food, that we are already consuming. So yeah, might not be bad to pick up some of those skills our ancestors did. There's not much money in farming, and then I was just like thinking, oh, why am I farming? Should be going to focus on making money, but now I'm questioning myself. Maybe I shouldn't have left that in the first place, you know? But yeah, all in good times. I almost feel like I need to go through enough pain so that I never turn my head around to even like get a sense of that pain, you know, like but the other aspect of that piece, it's almost like I crave that pain. It's almost like I want to feel that pain because that pain almost feels comforting. It's really weird. But it takes strong awareness to break through that cycle.
Mm.
Not to put myself through it all over again. It's almost like it's very subconscious. I can't even almost see it coming.
Mm.
Interesting. Good
Yeah.
question. Like, you know, are we at the point where we can really reverse things, change the direction and how we're headed, where we're headed? I do believe there's still more belief and there's still faith, and especially after what Shane said earlier, I think that's a really good piece to cut it out and post it on its own.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big man. Good.
Practicing my editing skills. Yeah, and I would just highlight too that like the spiritual path or awareness seems to always be growing towards like awareness of more and more of the subtle. Like you were saying, like just now, Mono, like it's very unconscious or subconscious where how these things emerge, and like to like notice it or become aware of it is like we're always asked in our spiritual growth to become more and more aware of the like the invisible, the subtle things at play, subtle energies moving and affecting us, affecting our decisions. Like the more we become aware of those, we can watch how they're having an effect on all of us as humanity, and we can also become effective of the subtle awarenesses that are like maybe the natural beautiful progressions of like seasons and things. There's subtle movements going through life that we want to attune ourselves with and harmonize with, because that's where our life and vitality can be the strongest, I think, as we harmonize with that bigger flow of energy that's moving through the cosmos, that's moving through the planet, that's moving, you know, through all life. Like if we can notice that and harmonize with it, we can stay inside that like powerful life flow, that's the eternal flow, and not get too far out of our center like the distractions. It's been a big full conversation already. I think we're probably a couple hours in, and maybe so that we don't completely exhaust ourselves, we can go ahead and bring tonight's conversation to a close. And in order to do that, we'll go ahead and close it out as we always do, and take a minute or two to call in the message of the higher self. The oversoul, that individuated aspect of source consciousness that you are, to really pull in the big picture of why we came here to talk tonight, what we said, what was heard, and if we can maybe distill the most beautiful essence out of that and capture it for ourselves so that we can take it away and maybe even give voice to it right now so that others can hear it. If we can channel a few words that captures the vibrational tone of our discussion tonight.
I would say that rewind and listen to what Shane said. That, because it was bang on, and it's definitely there or thereabouts. However, anyone chooses to label it, it's in that region. There's something that we are the middleman between, and you can call that lots of different things, and it happens in us, and if we can sense into those two things, we are the messenger between those things. So we're doing such a service that we're sending back and forth amongst two things that are really trying to communicate, you know, and and keep everything simple and start from there. That's what I'd say.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Lex. You know, what's present for me is just to drop in. You know, it's great to have all these conversations, but at the end of the day, then another invitation that's present within me is to drop into the silence of your heart, of your internal being, and listen to what the silence has to say. There is something there. There is a truth that echoes beyond word, a feeling that feels ever alive. And allow that voice to echo through you into this world. So it's present within me.
Imano. It's beautiful. I'm getting the message that the future is malleable and wide open, and we're still creating it. And to as much as we can get all kinds of crazy news to discourage us and distract us and convince us that we're disempowered, we're not. We still have an open playbook to come and have fun with today, tomorrow, and like bring our creative essence through. That it's an unfinished story that we're all co-creating right now, and to bring our joy into that process, and our like magnificence as well, like our like as big as we could dream it. Mm. It's my main message coming through. And I really got the word angel, Lex, when you were talking about the conversation between the two, and that we're like a messenger. And I was always taught that the word angel translated to messenger. And so it's like when we're a messenger for that conversation, we're being our angel selves. We're showing up as the earth angels that we are when we listen to that conversation. And I agree with you too, Mana, that it's in that silence that it's like that we can be present with that, maybe that conversation that's happening between the higher realms, between our earth realm and the higher realms. Or like in the silence, we can be present with that conversation, can create from that place, even in our silence. It's been another magical conversation and evening with the two of you. Calming, relaxing, grounding, uplifting. Say thank you. And any last words either of you would like to share before we close?
And I appreciate just the openness that we had in this conversation and the places that we got to go and the conversation we get to have. And every new episode is always very exciting. And today we hit the number 11. That's for me, it's a good sign. You're on the right track, doing the right thing. And yeah, we get to give voice to something that's alive within us. Otherwise, I don't think we'd show up here and just show the dedication that we do. So do want to thank you both for just bringing who you are and showing up in all the ways that you do. Yeah, I look forward to us creating this and celebrating our 111 episode when we get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it today as well. I liked the settling. We went important places and we're doing the best we can, and we seem to be getting better at it. So
I agree. Thank you, man. And thank you for all those who watch and feel a good connection when you tune in with this conversation. And thank you if you made it this far all the way to the end. Really appreciate your listening and your presence. And invite you to reach out and send messages, send questions, send requests, send anything. If you're interested in sitting in on this conversation live, that's an option. So the door is open for more people to join. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye-bye.